Okay, so I didn't write a script for episode one. Technically, I did write a script for episode one, but it's a whole thing. Anyway, so episode one, I sort of just did off the cuff, which is fine. But in rewatching it, there's a couple things that I wanted to maybe spend a little bit more time on, and so I want to do a couple errata episodes, as it were, to kind of elaborate or correct some things here and there. So the thing I wanted to talk about first is the use of My Darling Clementine in the score. So I mentioned this in the episode that Douglas Moore doesn't really use a lot of existing melodies, and he's just sort of trying to create a sense of the time, and kind of compose the feeling of a lot of those songs. And so it is kind of notable that he uses My Darling Clementine specifically, that he quotes that in there on purpose. And I think my initial assessment that part of the reason for that is to create a sense of time and place is very much part of why he does that. There, especially in 1956, American audiences are going to recognize that immediately, and so it does help sort of get the audience on board. But I've been reading Howard Pollack's biography of John Latouche, who wrote the libretto for The Ballad of Baby Doe, and he posits that part of the reason that Clementine shows up in this score is that it's been used in Tabor media before this, and I think he's onto something with that. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So in 1932, this book called Silver Dollar gets published. It's written by a guy named David Karstner, and it purports to tell the story of the Tabors. That same year, 1932, it gets made into a film, and then in 1939, a few years later, it's made into a radio play as well. Now, 1932, Lizzie Tabor is still alive. She's been up in Leadville for a few decades at this point. And so there's this interesting sort of convergence of timelines here where we still have one of the principals alive at the time that we're kind of getting into this nostalgia cycle, I guess, for this period. You know, we've gone into the Great Depression, and there's this push for this story to come back, because I think there's a level of, and Judy Nolte Temple talks about this a bit, that in her book Mad Woman in the Cabin, which I highly recommend. I'm in the middle of a reread right now, and it's, I think, the best Tabor book. I mean, it's really stunning. The empathy with which it handles the whole story is beautiful. It's also a devastating read. It is very difficult to get through sometimes, because some of the suffering that Lizzie is going through in her later life is really devastating. But it's an excellent book, and I highly recommend it. And she talks about this idea that during the Depression, the Tabors become popular again because it's this show of ostentatious wealth. People are dreaming of this gold and jewels and these glory days when someone could strike it rich, you know, and so that's sort of the appeal. But again, Lizzie's still alive as this is starting again. So it's complicated. She gets invited to the film premiere. The producers offer to cover her expenses if she'll come down, and she has no interest. I think the idea of being gawked at, and being part of that, and I think it's also just a chapter that she's kind of put to rest to some extent. You know, so she does not go, and in fact, she writes. There's a letter she writes to somebody where she's talking about the way this horrible film and book are weighing on her and breaking her heart. So, you know, and lawyers approach her after the premiere and say, hey, if you want, we could sue the pants off these guys. Like, you could make a ton of money. And she just doesn't want to rehash everything. She doesn't want to go through all that, and so she chooses not to. By this point, she's just about 80, and so it makes sense that she's kind of over it. It's worth noting that David Karstner never interviewed her for the book. In fact, he talked about intentionally not interviewing her because she was so old, and, you know, she probably doesn't remember anything anyway, and da-da-da-da-da, which, gross. You know, it's just gross. It's icky, and I don't like it. It's icky, especially because one of the people he ends up talking to, obviously, is Carolyn Bancroft. And this is before she writes Silver Dollar, not Silver Dollar, Silver Queen, her book Silver Queen. This is before, but she's working in the newspapers, and she's probably one of the contacts, because that's also, Karstner writes the myth about holding on to the matchless mine, about how Tabor said, hold on to the matchless. Carolyn! So, So we've got that kind of element at play, but the movie did renew a lot of interest in the story, and so after the premiere, people are going up to Leadville to try to talk to Lizzie, and by all accounts, she'd let people into the cabin and chatted with them sometimes if she felt like it. Um, I personally think David Carstner was a bit scared of her. This is just a theory. I think he was afraid of her. I think he was intimidated and didn't want to go try to talk to her. And she had a reputation by this point. The people of Leadville cared for her as one of their own, but outside of that, strangers. She was known to protect her property with a shotgun. She was always worried about claim jumpers trying to get into the matchless. Regardless of whether Tabor told her to hold on to it or not, she did spend decades trying to make it productive again. So